Hey guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a big refresh of my dodging and burning process for 2023 and basically my skin retouching process overall. So in terms of the main aspects, they are quite similar to what I was doing back in 2019, I think when I did my last dodging and burning video. But today I'm going to go through just a couple of extra tips, especially around dodging and burning, that are going to focus on what I like to do these days, because I feel like editing has slowly changed over the last number of years, and what is required a lot of the time by clients these days is quite different. There has been a bit of a shift. So I want to go through a couple of those tips as well. And I'm also going to be going a little bit more in depth with local and global dodging and burning. So we're going to go through those aspects today as well. If you do want to learn more about dodging and burning and beauty retouching overall, I do have my own course, Beauty Retouching for Beginners, which is now available at any time of the year. You have lifetime access to the content once purchased. So you will be able to go back to the videos and the content at any time you like to really understand some of those aspects a little bit more. I also have a retouching course with Domestika that might be of interest to you. So to see those courses that I do currently have available, make sure you go down to the description box below and go to my education website, which is listed. All right, guys, so let's get straight into the dodging and burning video today, and I hope you guys enjoy. Okay, so to start off, guys, we are now in Capture One, and I currently have my image here. I have just finished some color grading by just popping on a Capture One style, which is the same as a preset in Lightroom, and I've just done my color grading overall. So this is usually my process. What I'll do is I'll color grade in Capture One or Lightroom sometimes first, and then I'll bring my image into Photoshop to do any skin retouching or dodge and burn. So first off, I'm going to right click the image here in Capture One and select Edit with Adobe Photoshop. And we're going to edit it as a PSD. So now that we've got the image into Photoshop, I'm going to start with doing some minor skin cleanup. So just removing some of the obvious kind of blemishes or bumps on the skin. Now, overall, my process is pretty much similar to how it was back in 2019 when I did my last dodge and burn video. However, I do want to stress in this video now that dodging and burning has become something over the years that is more and more minimalistic to me. So I try to do as minimal work as possible now with dodge and burn and skin retouching overall. I think there's a really big shift that is happening, and I think rightly so. And I do think that we need to be really aware of how the skin is looking and whether it's looking natural or it's looking completely overdone, which is what happens a lot of the time when dodge and burn is used. So the technique that I'm going to show you guys today is going to be a little bit more light-handed, and you will notice that I'm not going into every pore. I'm not retouching every single little pore in the skin and every little crevice or every little bit of texture. I'm really trying to maintain the texture that we've got in the image, and I want the skin to look natural and to look like skin. So remember that less is more with this technique of dodge and burn. So let's jump into doing a little bit of quick cleanup just with some of the healing tools. So we're going to just create a blank layer down the bottom here. And then I'm going to rename this to healing. So we've created a blank layer here because we really want this process to be as non-destructive to the image as possible with all the tools that we're using today. So we are first going to be using the spot healing brush tool. Now, it really depends on the day. Sometimes I might use the healing brush tool as well. I quite like using that, and the clone stamp tool. But for now, I'm just going to use the spot healing brush tool. It's a really simple and easy, quick way of removing any little spots or bumps on the skin, or even stray hairs, which we'll also do. So just showing you my brush settings now. I have the hardness at 100%. I have pen pressure selected. If you're using a graphics tablet, this will come in handy. It'll allow you to be a little bit more controlled with your adjustments. I've got the size of the brush about to 100 pixels at the moment, but it's really going to depend on your image and whether it's a closer up shot that you might be editing. Also remember to make sure that you have sample all layers selected here. So this little checkbox needs to have the tick in it. This is because we want this tool to sample from our background layer onto this new layer here. So we're actually sampling from the background layer, even though we've got a blank layer here that we're working on. So otherwise, if you don't have that ticked, there's nothing that's going to be picked up on the blank layer. It'll be blank pixels. There's nothing there. So just make sure that that is definitely ticked before you start. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, but one of the main mistakes I think a lot of people make when it comes to skin retouching, especially these days, is that they zoom in way too far. Now, if I'm zooming in really, really far here to like the pore level, it's really hard to get an overall look or an overall feel for the image. And this becomes a problem because it allows you to kind of go a bit too far with your retouching without even noticing it until you kind of zoom out later on. So I kind of like to keep a relative distance. There's not too many occasions where you're going to need to be skin retouching so close up. I mean, look, if you're doing a billboard campaign, there may be that need for that, but honestly, most of the time, I like to kind of keep this kind of distance out from the skin and sort of have that good overview still. Okay, so you can use J on your keyboard as well to get the quick key for the spot healing brush tool, and hold shift if you want to kind of cycle through the healing tools. But for now, we're just going to stick with the spot healing brush tool, and I'm just going to remove a couple of the little bumps that we're seeing just in the image here. Although there's not really too many bumps that we really will have to remove here. So just any little hairs and things like that that you want to remove, we'll just use this tool quickly to do that. You'll probably notice overall that my skin retouching process is a lot quicker. As I said before, I do feel that these days it's not something that I put a focus on in my imagery, and I just think I've come to realize that it's so unnecessary to spend 4 hours retouching skin. I mean, there has been instances in my career where clients have specifically asked for that, but more and more these days there is a shift that is happening where clients don't want to see unrealistic skin. They want to see pores, they want to see texture, they even want to see blemishes and pimples from time to time, and that's completely okay. I think there needs to be a level of realization that there has been a change with a lot of commercial beauty photography, and sometimes less is just more when it comes to retouching, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. So I'm just removing some of those little hairs here. I'm just going to remove this fine line just here. And just a few bumps down here. Okay, so for now we're just going to leave it as that. I'm going to turn this layer on and off, and you can just see I've removed just a little bit of the texture there. Just a couple of the bumps. And now we're going to create our dodge and burn layers. So for those of you who have never used dodge and burn before, dodge and burn is the process of adding light and dark to an image to really create an even complexion or even skin tone, or kind of even out those areas of the skin that might just need a little bit more softness, or like I said, a bit more evenness. And I'm going to explain how it works exactly in just a second, but first we're going to create our dodge and burn layers. So to create dodge and burn layers, we just go down to the adjustment layers button just down here, and then we're going to go up to curves. So this is our first adjustment layer, and you can see that our curves box has just appeared up the top here. We're going to move this line right up. So this is going to be our dodge layer because it's brightening the image. Dodge is adding light to the image. So we're going to also make sure that this mask here, this layer mask, is selected, and hold down Control I on the keyboard, or Command I for a Mac, to invert the mask. So we want this little box to be black. We're then going to rename this to Dodge. Now we're going to do the exact same process again, but we're going to do it for the burn layer. So we're going to go down to our adjustment layers, we're going to go up to curves, and this time we're going to bring the line down. So it's getting darker, so this will be our burn layer. Making sure again that our layer mask is selected, we're going to hold down Control I to invert the mask, and we're going to rename this layer to burn. So you can also add these layers into groups, which I like to do quite often. So I'm going to just create a little folder here, and I'm going to call this Dodge and Burn. And I'm also going to create another folder here with the healing layer, and I'm going to call this Healing. So I'm just going to move the healing layer into the healing group, and the dodge and burn layers into the dodge and burn group. So there's not really any right or wrong way to start off with dodge and burn. You can use dodge first, or you can start with burn first. There's no particular area of the face that I like to start with when doing my skin retouching with dodge and burn, but I am going to zoom in just a little bit more so you can see what's kind of happening when I do apply these tools. We do first need to set our brush settings though. So we need to make sure that our paintbrush tool is selected on the side here. And we're going to make the size of the brush quite small. So probably about that size, about 42 pixels for this image, making sure that the hardness is also at 0%. Then we're also going to ensure that our opacity for the brush is at 100% and the flow is at 1%. This is going to really help with building up the dodging and burning in our image. We want to have full control over how the brushwork and everything is applied in the image. If you're using a mouse to dodge and burn, you might be best to have your opacity quite a bit lower, whether that be 20% or so, as well as flow, but it's going to really help to give you a little bit more control and build up your dodging and burning a bit more. Also, make sure when you go over to brush settings over here that the transfer box is checked. So going to the transfer section, I also like to make sure that under opacity jitter, pen pressure is selected from the drop down menu where it says control here. So as a final setting, we also have to make sure that white is selected as the color, the foreground color here. Now this is because we're working on the mask, on the adjustment layer mask, and we're actually going to be bringing those adjustments through with dodge and burn that we've applied with the curves layer. So it's currently invisible on the image, but we're going to bring some of that back. So starting off on our dodge layer, we're actually going to start lightening certain parts of the skin tone here. So you can adjust your brush size as you go along, and you're probably going to have to because there will be certain sections where you'll need a larger brush and some where you'll need a smaller brush. So also to make a note here, we are actually starting off with local dodging and burning. Now local dodging and burning is done and performed zoomed in to the image. So we're really working with a smaller brush on some of these areas. And then we're going to move on to doing global dodging and burning a little bit later on, where we'll use a larger brush, and it's kind of more to bring it all together. We'll be a lot more zoomed out on the image as well. So just zooming in a little bit more and selecting our brush, we're going to start running the brush over these areas here. You can see that there's a little bit of darkness here where the highlight is quite obvious, but then there's these little gaps here that just happen to be a little bit darker. So what we're essentially doing is filling it in with the light to make it appear just that little bit more even. So I'm not going to be too specific about this. I'm just kind of doing this quite roughly, as is my technique these days. It is really not super detailed with dodge and burn. I just kind of do it until it looks and starts to look a little bit more even. When I first started off with using dodge and burn, I probably would have been zoomed in a lot closer and I'd be doing every little pore, and I just think these days that is probably a little bit more unnecessary to do that. Because we really want to keep that texture on the skin tone. So you can see that I'm just running the dodge brush just over some of those areas where it's a little bit darker, and it kind of looks like little gaps where the highlight is on the skin. So I'm going to continue to fill in some of these little spots, and then we'll move on to using the burn tool as well. So you can also change the brush size to be a little bit bigger, and just kind of, if you want to lighten the under eye area just a bit, you can do that. And I'm going to zoom out now just to show you what that has actually done to the image. So before we go too far with it, we're just going to take a breather, zoom out, and see what we've done so far. So I'm going to just turn that on and off, and you can see that that's really made those areas a little bit more even overall. You can see it's just kind of filled that in. So now I'm also going to move on to using the burn layer. So we're going to select that and the mask. And it's really important that you do use a really good equal amount of dodge and burn in your image. If you constantly use just dodge to your image, it's really going to lighten the skin tone overall. Now, this is especially true when it comes to working with deeper skin tones. You really want to be using a good combination of dodge and burn, but you'll be using the burn tool more often. I would say with lighter skin tones, you'll probably use the dodge tool more often. We are going to use dodge a little bit more today, but if I was working on a deeper skin tone, I would be using primarily burn for the most part. So now with burn, I'm going to zoom in a bit more again. We're going to get our brush tool back. And we're just going to slightly blend some of these areas. So I don't want the whole cheek to be highlighted because that's not how the original image was. We want to make sure that we've still got that contrast and the skin's not looking too flat and too even overall. So I'm actually just going to work at burning just some of these areas on the side here. And just kind of like blending some of those little patchy areas just there with the highlight. Just to kind of blend it a little bit more. If you feel that some of the highlight is too strong in areas, you can also use the burn tool just to run over those parts as well, which is just what I'm doing, just slightly to make it a bit easier to blend there. So most of the time, the best rule to work to with dodge and burn is using dodge on the lighter areas and then burn on the darker areas and some of the midtones as well. Doesn't always work like that, but for a lot of the time, in the shadows and when you're working in these kinds of areas, you'll be using the burn tool. And then when you're working in the lighter highlighted areas, you'll be using the dodge. Okay, so I'm going to start to zoom out a little bit more here. And I'm just going to turn that layer on and off. And you can see that it's just kind of blended some of these sections just a little bit more. And we're not kind of making it too light here. We're not going to drag the dodge down too far. Although I do think we need just a little bit more dodging in this section here. So I'm just going to go back to the dodge layer. And just kind of do a little bit there. Okay, so zooming out again, I'm just going to take a snapshot now and show you guys the original. So this is the before. And now this is the after. So you can see that it's really just created that little bit more evenness. And really for that cheekbone right now, that is pretty much all I do until we get to any global dodging and burning where we might do a bit of contouring just around the sides there. But this is basically how I would proceed with the rest of the image. And I'm going to continue on now with dodging and burning the rest of the image. And then I'll speed it up just a little bit so you guys don't have to sit here for another 15 minutes or so. And then we'll move on to our global dodging and burning. Okay, so now that we've finished our dodging and burning on the skin tone locally, we're actually going to move on to doing some global dodging and burning. So I've continued on with our local just around the other sections of the face. We're going to start to look at the image now and see where there's some little patches just here where I can see that I've dodged and burned locally, but because I've been zoomed in, I couldn't really see the overall shot. So we do need to blend those sections just a little bit more. So I'm going to first go to burn here, and working on some of the midtones up here on the forehead, I'm just going to move the burn tool into just some of those lighter sections there that just look a little bit patchy. We're just really gently blending them back in to the skin tone. So that's looking pretty good. And I'm going to do the same thing just over here. So you'll have to adjust your brush size. Most of the time, global dodging and burning is done with a larger brush size, so probably around like this size. And you can kind of just do a bit of contouring. But you can also use a smaller brush size just to kind of blend in any sections that do look a little bit patchy from the local dodging and burning. Okay, so just to give you a quick progress snapshot, I'm going to just do a before and after so far. So that's looking quite good to me. And as kind of like a finishing touch these days for my dodge and burn work, I usually like to just add a really softening effect just on some of the skin texture if it does still look a little bit rough, because I don't really go into every crevice, like I said, and every little bump now and retouch it out with dodge and burn. So usually as a kind of a finishing touch, or just to kind of add to the skin retouching process, and as I've mentioned, I don't really use dodge and burn for a huge portion of that anymore. It's really been stripped a bit more down to basics with it. So we're actually going to create a new layer up here, and we're going to name it Clone Stamp. But I am going to move that just above the dodge and burn layer, and I'm going to create its own folder, and we're just going to call it Texture. So we'll just move that Clone Stamp layer in there. And now I'm going to go over to the Clone Stamp tool, so just over on the side here. We're going to make sure that the hardness is 0% and that the size is quite large, so about 500 pixels for this image. And making sure that our opacity and flow is at around the 20% mark for both of them. This is going to be a really soft effect that we're just going to gently apply to the image. And we need to make sure that our brush settings, once again, we'll just make sure that transfer is selected and with pen pressure as well for the opacity jitter. So to use the Clone Stamp tool, we're going to hold down Alt on the keyboard or Option for Mac, and we're going to start selecting areas of the skin and then gently running the brush over those more textured areas just to get a little bit more smoothness. So I'm just going to start here and sample, and then just very gently run the brush continuously over that area. And same down here as well. So I'm just gonna very gently blend some of those areas in just a bit more with the Clone Stamp tool. But it's really important not to go too overboard with this tool. It's really easy to do so. So we're just going to make sure that we are being pretty light-handed with it. And even if you just want to soften some of the facial hairs, it's usually a technique that I use to do that as well. But I really don't get rid of all the facial hairs these days. I just don't see any real point to doing that. It sort of adds that natural effect to the skin tone, which we want. So I don't really see the point in removing some of those. Okay, so zooming out, I'm just going to do this technique a little bit more just on the shoulders here. Okay, so now as a final before and after, I'm going to go back to the original image. So this is the original. And now this is the after. So realistically, we haven't removed every little bump, we haven't removed every little pore. I'd probably go back in just really carefully removing some of the makeup fallout as well. So you can always go back to healing layer for this and grabbing the spot healing brush tool. You can just kind of go back in and clean up any makeup fallout that might have happened or any extra little bits of texture that you don't really want. But usually by this point, the techniques that I've used have pretty much cleaned up anything in particular that I need to remove. And I'm thinking overall that's looking pretty good. I probably wouldn't go much further with that at all. So overall, I'm pretty happy with that. And that is basically my dodging and burning technique. So just a quick before and after again. So before and after. And realistically, this is how I retouch these days. I really don't spend hours and hours and hours on each image. I will sometimes get the requests from clients to have a certain level of retouching on images, but for me, I like to keep a very natural effect, and it's really only the temporary imperfections that you kind of tend to remove now. Thank you guys so much for watching this video today. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, make sure that you do, because I'll be posting lots more content in future. If you want to learn more about beauty retouching and general post-processing techniques, as I said, I do have some courses available over on my education website that you can click through to. And if you do have any more requests for my YouTube channel, please put them in the comments section below, as I'd love to hear them. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.